Well, since we are on an epic journey, we might need a set of hiking boots to be able to, take with us when the going gets rough. We can throw those on. So how do we go about modeling those? Well, in this case, I've just got this background image up. Again, you can use image planes to display your work, or stick them on your second monitor, which is often what I'm doing. But let's update that. So I'm going to go down to viewport background here and configure viewport background, Alt-B, and go and grab my new image, and it's going to be my boots. Make sure you're on match bitmap, right? And apply, and then you've got your image up that we can do whatever with. Now let's hide off some stuff. Don't need those for now. But I might want to actually start with this frozen in place. So what's nice is if I freeze it, it'll freeze the objects in place. Problem is I can't see through them. So I can make them all see-through. And you make things see-through by right-clicking on them and going Object Properties and going and turning on see-through. The thing with see-through is that it is on one object at a time. I want to make everything in this scene, everything in the backpack anyway, see-through or not, which could be really handy to be able to toggle on and off, okay? So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab everything that's in my backpack layer. You can also do that by just double-clicking on that layer, and it'll pick everything in it. I'm going to right-click and say Object Properties and say instead of these settings working by object, I want them to work by the layer they're in so that I can control these settings by the layer settings. Say OK. Notice I didn't make them see-through. Under Customize, Configure Columns, these are all the columns we can add, okay, to the Scene Explorer. I'm going to scroll on down and I'm going to find see-through, and I'm just going to drag and drop that wherever I want it to be. Now, if I just kind of move that, you'll see that there's the see-through, column. Okay, so we can get that up there. I'll just make it smaller. And there we go. We got see-through. And if I make that see-through now, because we set it to by layer, it'll now make those all see-through. And then I can freeze it. So now I can't get to them by mistake. Okay, so now I've got this in there. I can start thinking about sort of sizes. Now you're modeling to scale, correct? And since you're modeling to scale, you could easily just measure a good set of boots and, go in and make them that size. But in this case, I'm going to do it a little bit, kind of like this. I'm going to create a new layer here. So I'm just going to go in and create a new layer and call this boots. It's active because it's got the little green pages beside it. And I'm going to start with a box. And so I'm just going to drag out a box and drag it up a bit. Now that box is going to represent a box that basically fits around the bottom part of the boot, not this top piece, okay? So there's that piece there. And again, I find easiest if I throw things into 0, 0, 0. And get started in there. So that seems like a really big boot. Let's, reduce the length of it. Let's make it a little smaller, probably something like that. And let's try and get it into something that looks like a reasonable size to begin with. So here's that item. I'm just going to go hide all of this now. And I tend to like making things, gray tone or some tone of what I'm working on. And a cool way of doing that is I'm going to pick that gray, for instance, but I'm going to go add custom colors, and I'm going to go in and pick a value right off the boot that I might like to sort of work with, just as an average kind of color. Again, you could do this in a shader itself, but in this case, I'm just going to go grab something that might look good like that and say add color and OK. And I can now change that color to whatever, to that color item, okay? So with that being done, I also just want to check my viewport settings. I'm right-click on that little funnel thing, and I want to make sure that progressive skylight is off so it doesn't flash, and I want to make sure that my quality is set up at 4. And so that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to collapse that down to an editable poly. It's not symmetrical in any direction, so no symmetry is needed. I'm going to add my turbo smooth. I'm going to set it on iterations 2 with the ISO line on and head back down to editable poly. And so I can toggle that on and off with my Alt tilde setting. And then I can start thinking about this in terms of being a boot. And having a little bit of shape. So first off, let's consider that, in a boot, we're going to have a narrower heel than the other end. So I'm just going to narrow that out. I selected them all, and I'm just going to use my scale just to scale them down like that. And, the toe sticks out more than the side a little bit. So this probably just could come back maybe a little bit. And we're going to go and start on something like this. Now, swift loop, so I just did Alt-1. And where does it start really sort of pulling up into this shape? Well, it does tilt up, but then somewhere here. So you could almost think of this shape more as the box is going to be on an angle like this and then down. And so that's going to be our box, looking at it on side. And then we're going to extrude this chunk up and out from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab maybe about there. And then 2 in the keyboard for the edge. And I'm going to get out of screen mode and Alt right click. I just chose view. And I'm going to pull that up so it kind of starts to give me that angle across the boot here. Okay. And again, what can we shape now? So we've got some new verts, so consider the shape and form that we're going to need to be able to pull this off. Okay, 4 in the keyboard, I'm going to grab this, shift, drag it up, and that's going to become the top part of my boot. Okay, and it's going to take a whole lot of shaping now, and since we've got that, I'm going to grab that edge, and I'm going to pull it in, I'm going to pull that in a bit. Okay, start getting a bit of that shape going. And so far, hey, we've got no, we don't really. That's not really a boot. That's more like a bad sock, okay, at this stage. But, how can we, put this together now? What the other thing I like doing is I'm going to grab the bottom 2 pieces, and I'm not going to worry about the sole at this point, which I've kind of taken into consideration with my box. I'm just going to consider the top leather piece, and then we can extrude the sole out afterwards. So I'm going to push that up, and I may even pull this one in. So I'm just going to scale that maybe more likely that edge, and just scale that in maybe a bit like that, because it gets pulled tight in here. And then we can go about shaping a little bit more. So I'm going to drop in an edge loop, and I held down shift. Doesn't look like it did really what I want. And so now how do we get that shape going this way? And we're probably going to need one going around this way. And I'm not going to hold down shift again, because it's going to give me shapes. And I'm going to start thinking about the shape of that boot. So you can see even at this stage, I can really start considering the shape of that boot, and looking down from the top, and how that's going to be formed as I put this together. That heel isn't very good. We need to round this out to round out the back now that we've got that one in there. So I'm just going to double click, and I'm going to pull that in, and we just start shaping and forming from here. And don't get ahead of yourself. There's a lot that can be done with just a very few vertices to start creating the form. Maybe I want to shape on here. I'm just going to grab that and that, maybe pull that out a bit as it comes out down here, and same here, somewhere in there. And this front part isn't very round, so let's round that off. It needs to get rounded out and thinned out a little bit up top here. So don't get ahead of yourself and start pulling, adding loops everywhere until you've really shaped out what you've got going. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do some speed modeling and speed this all up for you so you see where this kind of goes and how it comes about. So in that speed modeling, you know, I've got to a point, maybe the nose needs to be a little longer. I don't have that much going yet, which is great because I can easily, you know, change out the sort of the tip, maybe push some of this back. Pretty easy, you know, to be able to grab this and, you know, work on the overall shape of it, making sure as I go along it stays looking right. Now I'm almost going to keep setting smooth. That's in properties. It'll be up here for you somewhere, upper right properties. It isn't necessary because turbo smoothing it out, but it just makes it look better as you're working on it. Keeping things even, like I added this loop around here, you know, so I want to make sure that it's keeping my mesh even and clean. You know, I've added a bunch of stuff, so I really need to go back now and take a look at what, you know, sort of changes have to happen in this. I just realized I was working in screen space and I wanted to keep that flat, so I'm going to just go back out of that. Start grabbing these, you know, thinking about how does this area here look, you know, on a real boot. You know, so I've got a lot of extra edges here and I haven't, you know, really made sure I'm playing around with them. Now, one of the things I could do is go and make this bottom edge harder, but don't do it yet because, you know, you're not in a position to do so at this point until, you know, because you're just adding more vertices. You're just making it harder to work on the shape. So I'm accepting the fact that some of this stuff is a little too soft, you know, when you look at these hard edges, that we don't have this, you know, grid on the bottom. You know, do you really need it? And can it be added with a separate object so you're not adding a billion polygons to the boot? It is a separate object, so we could actually rip some of this sole off of here and do it as a separate object, so that we can have more vertices in it, you know, when we start modeling it. You know, this boot has this flap, so I pulled it out of it, and you'll notice in the speed part that I redirected that loop to go around and back, around and up to the other side, but I wanted to follow that contour so I get nice contour lines. You can see where it kind of fits together here. Other things like maybe this other piece that comes out and whatever, I'd either pull out of this side now and tuck it underneath, or you could actually just add a plane and model it out of a separate plane or whatever. You know, the things like the laces are just well-placed spline wrapping back and forth. This is a little item you make, and you can use your placing tool to place them up the side, but there's no point in doing that until a lot more of it is done, right? And then it's coming together. Now, I've added a shell in here to give it this shell, and it looks like it's on segments 2. I don't want that. You know, so it's going to have you know, that interior, but again, how much of that interior do I need? So I'll want to do some cleanup on that, follow that cleanup video, and I can go and make sure I get rid of parts of this that just aren't necessary. You know, unless you were seeing down inside of it, but realistically, none of it should be necessary. Also, the sides of the boot are probably a lot thinner than this part up here, you know, so my shell might be just too much. You know, it probably needs to be, you know, because this is really thin. So we'll just go with that leather part. And then what we can do is we can extrude some of those, you know, this part in here, you know, it's a separate piece again. Could we just do it with a separate piece and add it in? That might be the best solution. Or again, you could go in and add it in with, you know, by dropping a piece in here, and then grabbing the polygons all the way around, and I'll just turn off my show end result. It doesn't continue over this piece, you know, so let's get that off of there. Okay, so it doesn't continue this ring around the top, this soft ring. You know, maybe it's just that, maybe even that one we're going to get rid of because we got rid of on that side. And then we can do that extrude again. And I tend to find that the extrude is better. Hold down shift or open the settings, but hold down shift, it'll open the settings. Set it to local normal and then play with how much it is pushing it out. Now you're going to note that the shell is shelling it inside like this. Are we going to see it? Again, back to that sort of thing. And two, you know, we could delete the shell on the inside, rebuild the inside of it, and pull it up and around manually afterwards as we're doing the shell cleanup side of it, right? Or we just get rid of the shell entirely and we rebuild and we, you know, sort of extrude it in to give it thickness, for all these areas. So there's a bunch of ways we could handle that inner thickness part. And again, so that's starting to give us that shape. I'm just going to go, you can see that going through these, you're going to get all kinds of different stuff. So I'm just going to push that out a bit and give us that. And again, we could even go in and do a loop on there to round it out even more and give us that, rounded feel on the top there. And then we want to work around underneath, hardening it up and whatever. And we could use our edge creasing for some of it. So there's a bunch of ways we can go. But there you go. There is a boot that is mostly done.